Marcus Chen had always been taught that kindness cost nothing. As he sat in the cramped passenger compartment of the interstellar transport Nexus runner, watching the swirling blues and purples of hyperspace through the viewport, he couldn't have imagined how profoundly that simple lesson would change his life. The transport was packed with beings from across the galaxy, Zephyrians with their crystalline exoskeletons, gaseous Vorthak contained in environmental suits, and dozens of other species Marcus couldn't begin to identify. He was one of only 3 humans aboard, heading to the frontier colony of New Kepler for his first assignment as a xenobiological researcher. 3 hours into the journey, Marcus noticed an elderly Altarian struggling down the narrow aisle, the reptilian being moved with obvious difficulty, his scaled hands gripping seatbacks for support, his distinctive dorsal ridge curved with what could only be chronic pain. The Altarian's breathing was labored, creating small puffs of vapor in the ship's recycled atmosphere. Without hesitation, Marcus stood up. "Excuse me, sir," he said, activating his universal translator. "Would you like to sit?" "I'm perfectly fine standing." The elderly Altarian's large amber eyes widened in surprise. Around them, conversations quieted as other passengers turned to watch this unusual interaction. In galactic society, humans were still relatively new, barely 2 centuries since first contact, and were often viewed as unpredictable primitives. "Young human," the Altarian said, his voice a melodious rumble. "This is unexpected. You would give your purchased seat to a stranger?" "Of course," Marcus replied, already gathering his small pack. "You clearly need it more than I do." The gesture sent ripples of astonishment through the passenger compartment. A Zephyrian's crystalline structure chimed with what Marcus had learned indicated surprise. 2 Vorthak swirled more rapidly in their containment suits, their equivalent of excited chatter. The elderly Altarian, who introduced himself as Keeper Zexhai, settled into the seat with visible relief. "In my 3 centuries of travel," he said, "no being has ever offered such spontaneous courtesy to another species. Tell me, young human, what is your name?" "Marcus Chen, sir." "Marcus Chen," Zexhai repeated thoughtfully. "I shall remember this name." The rest of the journey passed pleasantly, with Marcus standing despite the Keeper's repeated offers to share the seat. They talked about Marcus's research, the frontier colonies, and Zexhai's long career as what Marcus gathered was some kind of military advisor. Other passengers gradually joined their conversation, creating an unusually social atmosphere for interstellar travel. When the transport docked at New Kepler Station, Marcus helped Keeper Zexhai with his luggage and wished him well before heading toward the research facility's shuttle bay. He thought that would be the end of their encounter. He was wrong. 2 days later, Marcus was cataloging microbial samples in his laboratory when his supervisor, Dr. Sarah Walsh, burst through the door, her face pale with excitement and confusion. "Marcus," she said breathlessly, "there's an Altarian military delegation here. They're asking for you specifically." "That's impossible," Marcus replied, looking up from his microscope. "I don't know any Altarian military personnel." But as they walked to the facility's main conference room, Marcus's heart began to race. Through the transparent aluminum doors, he could see a dozen figures in the distinctive midnight blue uniforms of the Altarian Defense Corps. At their center sat a familiar figure. Keeper Zexhai rose as Marcus entered, but he was no longer the struggling elderly traveler from the transport. He wore the silver insignia of a High Keeper, one of the highest-ranking military advisors in the Altarian hierarchy. The other officers, Marcus could now see they were all elite commandos from their ceremonial scars, stood at rigid attention. "Marcus Chen," Zexhai said formally, "I present to you the Starfire Squadron, the finest warriors in the Altarian Defense Corps." Marcus stood frozen as 12 elite alien soldiers bowed in perfect synchronization. "I don't understand," Marcus stammered. Zexhai's scaled features arranged themselves into what Marcus had learned was an Altarian smile. "In our culture, we believe that how one treats those who can offer nothing in return reveals the true nature of their character. You gave your seat to what you believed was a frail old alien asking nothing, expecting nothing." The High Keeper gestured to his commandos. "These warriors have spent decades earning their place in this squadron through combat, sacrifice, and absolute loyalty to our people. Yet in 10 minutes of simple kindness, you displayed the warrior's heart more clearly than many who bear the title." One of the commandos, A female with intricate scarification covering her arms stepped forward. The human showed honor without cause, compassion without reward. This is the way of the true warrior. Which is why, Zexai continued, the Altarian Defense Corps would like to offer you something unprecedented. Not membership, that is impossible for non-Altarians, but alliance. You would become the first human liaison to the Starfire Squadron, a bridge between our peoples. Marcus felt the weight of the moment settling around him like the gravity of a new world. I'm just a researcher, he said quietly. I study microbes, not military strategy. You study life, Zexai corrected, and you understand what makes it precious enough to protect. The squadron doesn't need another warrior, Marcus Chen. It needs someone who remembers that we fight not for conquest, but for the right of all beings to exist with dignity. Dr. Walsh, who had been listening in stunned silence, finally found her voice. Marcus, do you understand what they're offering? This could change everything for human-alien relations. Marcus looked around the room at the elite soldiers who had somehow found him worthy of their respect, all because he had offered his seat to someone in pain. In that moment he realized that perhaps his parents had been right about kindness costing nothing. But they had never mentioned that sometimes it could be worth everything. High Keeper Zexai, Marcus said, standing straighter. I would be honored to accept. The Starfire Squadron's ceremonial roar of approval echoed through New Kepler Station, marking the beginning of a new chapter in galactic history, one that started with a simple act of human decency in the cramped aisle of an interstellar transport. Sometimes the greatest adventures begin not with grand gestures, but with the quiet choice to be kind when no one expects it.